Namaste, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We will begin shortly. As usual, we invite everyone to take a moment, make sure that you are muted so as to minimize distractions. Taking a moment to decide if you'd like to keep your camera on or off, whatever you're comfortable with. And finding a comfortable seat, a posture that helps us to be grounded and focused and present, and at the same time, relaxed and at ease. Meditation or mindfulness or meditative sits. These are meant to be practices that stretch us and help us to find those growing edges, but they need not be unnecessarily uncomfortable. So we want to make sure that wherever we are, we're comfortable and also focused. We'll begin as we generally do, after the ringing of the bell, with 3 deep breaths, breathing in, if possible, through the nostrils. Some of us may be dealing with physiological issues like sinuses or allergies, which make it a little challenging or painful to do that. So just connecting with your body, knowing what your body needs, but if at all possible, breathing in deeply through the nostrils, holding the breath for a few beats, and then releasing again through the nostrils or softly between the lips as is accessible to us. And on the exhale, perhaps holding for a little bit longer. I won't be counting, but feel free to follow along based on what you hear from the follow along with the pace that I'm breathing at, or simply find a pace that works for you. An invitation here to close the eyes or soften the gaze if we haven't already done so. And we'll begin. Taking our first deep breath in together. Again, and we can exaggerate or sigh out if we'd like to when we breathe out. Breathing in deeply. And one final deep breath in and out. Continuing to breathe through, perhaps allowing the breath now to find its own pace, its own rhythm. Allowing ourselves a few moments to settle into that rhythm of the breath. And to turn our awareness towards the breath. As we often say, breathing is perhaps the most foundational, simplest, and yet most essential activity that we perform all the time. So we're breathing all the time, but how often are we noticing this amazing process of breathing. Allowing ourselves to be curious here. What happens in this moment when I simply notice my breathing? Each breath we take in is already formulating and manifesting as the next breath out. And each breath out is already connected, already paving the way for the next breath in. And the most beautiful thing is it's happening all on its own. It doesn't require us to do anything. It doesn't depend on our qualifications or expertise. It doesn't even necessitate our awareness of it happening. It just happens. It just is. It is a gift. When our beloved gives us a gift, when that gift is imbued with their love, it doesn't even matter whether or not we accept it or we notice it. From the perspective of our beloved, of the giver, the gift is simply given. But if we choose, we can simply be aware of the gift. We can simply notice it. We can bring our mind, our thoughts back to this gift. And in the simple act of returning our thoughts, our awareness, our presence to this gift, this breath, this moment. In this simple process, we can show our gratitude for the gift. If that feels resonant with us, perhaps here we can lean a little bit more deeply into that feeling of gratitude that might be appearing on the horizon for us, that might be awakening for us. Even as we continue to notice this breath and this moment, we can also turn our awareness to this feeling of gratitude. What is the texture of the feeling of gratitude? What is its weight? What are its dimensions? Registering perhaps any physical or physiological sensations that are accompanying this powerful feeling of gratitude. Simply noticing these sensations without judgment. Turning our awareness deeper within to any internal sensations that may be accompanying this noticing of gratitude. Scanning perhaps the landscape of our minds and our hearts. Perhaps we experience this gratitude as a lightness of heart, or perhaps for some of us, it has the weight and the depth of something substantial and precious. For some of us, perhaps it is a feeling of being pulled upwards and outwards. Perhaps we feel an expansion, or perhaps it's that feeling of being a little bit more grounded, of that wonderful retreat that we spoke about some weeks ago, of drawing in to a place of safety and nourishment and beauty. Maybe it's something we want to hold very close to us and keep very private and intimate and personal. Just as our breathing is our own, our awareness is our own, so also this experience of gratitude, it's our own. It's individual. We might even think of it as a precious secret that we share, that's just between us and the beloved, the giver of gifts. Bringing now our meditation to a close, returning with more intention to the simple awareness of the breath, the flow, the present moment. Closing our meditation now with one final deep breath in, and chanting or hearing the infinite sound, the sacred syllable Om. Breathing in. Om. Softly, gently, and in a way that's comfortable to you, an invitation to open the eyes or widen the gaze, and to return our awareness to the room that we're sitting in, to the computer screen or phone in front of us, and to this wonderful opportunity to share in community, gathering together. Last week, we spoke about the idea of wind. We'd like to continue on that theme. The Gita uses the metaphor of wind in a number of ways. It actually is one of the themes that's most often repeated in the Bhagavad Gita and other yoga texts. Today's reflection takes this idea of wind in a slightly different direction, although I think it complements the reflection that we shared last week. Today's reflection reads, to experience sustained peace, Shanti, we must guard against the strong winds around us and cultivate steadiness in practice. Last week, you'll remember we spoke about the power of wind as an analogy for how the senses can so powerfully draw our minds away from the focus of our intention and can take us so far away from connection with ourselves that it's compared to the way a strong wind can carry away a boat on the seas, a rudderless boat. So this is the power of wind. Distractions can so easily take us so far from where we want to be and where we need to be. Cravings, anxiety, fear, anticipation of the future, or lamentation about the past, whatever form these winds take, so often, particularly if we're not aware of it and we're not vigilant about it, these winds just pull us. And before we know it, we find ourselves seemingly in the middle of a turbulent ocean that, how did we even get here? In the 6th chapter of the Gita, Krishna again invokes this idea of the wind, but here talking about the absence of wind. Yatha dipo nivatasto nengate sopama smrita yogino yata chittasya yunjato yogam atmanaha. Shri Krishna tells Arjuna and tells all of us, as a lamp in a windless place does not flicker or waver, so also the yogi, whose mind is controlled, remains steady in meditation on the transcendent self. So what does this evoke for us, this idea of a windless place? Well, if we think about it, there's really two approaches, and I'd like to touch briefly on these two approaches. And these are not mutually exclusive. In fact, these are two necessary approaches that I would suggest we think about in terms of working together and complementing one another, being in tandem, in parallel. The first approach is the approach of finding a windless place, locating a windless place. And I'd like to liken this or connect this with the idea of the Sanskrit term sangha, which is sometimes translated as association or even friendship. And it is that, but it also can be understood in a broader way as a sense of whatever we're in contact with. So that's the first approach. And the second approach I'd like to speak about is creating a windless place for ourselves. And this is very much connected to the idea of sadhana or practice. So the first approach is locating a windless place. If we can find a situation, a set of circumstances, even a physical location where, in our analogy, where there's not wind blowing, where there's an environment of stillness, then we can place our lamp there, like this is a traditional Indian oil lamp or a ghee lamp, a deepam. So we can place our deepa there, our lamp or our candle, and by the strength of the place that we've placed the candle, by the nature of the place is such that we can rest assured that that candle flame or that lamp flame will burn brightly. And so we might think about this in terms of sangha. If we reflect, our atmosphere, our environments matter. Sometimes we like to tell ourselves that it really doesn't, that all environments are the same and it doesn't really matter. But when we're honest with ourselves, we think about even what to speak of the physical environments that we're in, but everything that we're interacting with has an impact. Just as we impact it, it impacts us. Imagine trying to study or read a very deep, complex book of philosophy. Imagine trying to do that sitting on a park bench by a very picturesque, beautiful stream or pond. The sun is shining, not so bright that it hurts your eyes, but it's shining brightly, illuminating everything. There's warmth. There's maybe the sounds of birds chirping. And in that environment, you can dive into that book and you feel so connected to that book. Now imagine reading the same book, but now doing it in a lower level nightclub at 2 o'clock in the morning with dance music blaring and people smoking around you and the lights turned down really dimly, right? Obviously, it's a completely different experience. You're the same person, ostensibly, the book is the same, but your interaction, your experience will be, practically speaking, the exact opposite. And so we're invited to reflect on the ways in which our environment, the things that we contact and come into contact with, the spaces that we inhabit, the times of day, all of this, how that plays a role in whether we are able to maintain that sustained place of steadiness and calm and peace, right? If we're constantly tuned in to the 24-hour news cycle, now, of course, it's important to be aware and abreast of what's going on in the world. And that's important to be an informed citizen. But if we're unable to disconnect from this, and we're constantly tuning in to the news and we're hearing about this tragedy and this upheaval and this tension and this disaster and this projection, what is our consciousness going to be like? When we sit to meditate or to reflect, or when we go for a walk, what's going to play constantly in our mind, right? So our environments matter. And so understanding a windless place in this way is an invitation to be more intentional, to decide for ourselves, where do I want to spend the majority of my time, the majority of my day? What do I want my external environment to look like? What are those spaces that, not out of judgment or condemnation, but out of a sense of self-awareness of what's healthy for us, what are those spaces that we want to just simply avoid or keep a distance from, right? All of that forms our sangha. So we want to be very aware of what is the nature of that room when we think about a windless place. But there's a second approach that doesn't get spoken about nearly as often. And that is, as much as we may try, and we should try, to cultivate with intention the most conducive spaces, the most windless places, if you will, we are also embodied beings living in a complex world. And no matter what our efforts and our best intentions, by the very nature of this material world, of engaging with the world, and we want to be engaged yogis, we don't want to escape from the world or hide from the world. We want to extend out when it's appropriate and constructive to do so. By the nature of the world that we extend out into, there will be wind. And it's wishful thinking and kind of naivete to imagine that there won't. But we can create a little windless place for ourselves that we can carry around with us. And I love the imagery of these. I think they're called hurricane candles, if I'm not mistaken. So I like that imagery of what to speak of winds, even powerful gusts of winds and storms and hurricanes that may arise in our life. If we have this sort of fortress or force field of protection that surrounds us at any given time in any given place, then we bring that windless place with us. We cultivate that windless place. And what these texts and teachings have described for centuries upon centuries is that is accessible to all of us. That's not dependent on the external circumstances. That is something that we can cultivate for ourselves through our practice, through our sadhana. We sit down in meditation practice, we create, to the best of our ability, a distraction-free environment for ourselves and perhaps for others if we're meditating with others, not because we expect the world to always be distraction-free, but because we take the precious opportunity of practice to build up that force field around us that we can carry with us. We practice an environment windlessness, of being free as far as possible from distraction, both externally and the distraction of the inner noise, the inner distractions, the mental chatter. Through our sincere efforts, and particularly with repetitive, consistent practice, we start to cultivate and strengthen that force field that then we can take with us out into the world, out into the wind. And so, an invitation for you, if you'd like to, something to reflect on for the rest of this week before we meet again, is to take stock of what form is the wind in my life taking right now, or even what form does it tend to take for me? What are these patterns where I notice? What are the winds that tend to affect me most, that tend to sweep me away most? And what can I do with intention as far as cultivating or being aware of the sangha of my environment, but also cultivating a practice, a sadhana? What does that windless place look like for me on both of these levels? To experience sustained peace, we must guard against the strong winds around us and cultivate steadiness in practice. So thank you all again for joining us. If anyone has any questions or comments, I'm happy to stay for a few minutes. But otherwise, it's just such a joy and such a blessing to be able to spend these few minutes together each week to hit the pause button and to more intentionally try to create for ourselves and for one another these windless places, these windless spaces. So thank you all so much. Wonderful. And thank you all for the affirming comments that are coming through, both private messages and messages to the group in the chat box. I really do really value and more than even value, I'm sustained by your words of encouragement and affirmation. So thank you for that. Have a wonderful rest of your day and wonderful rest of your week to come. And divinity willing, we will see you next week. Take care. Namaste.